Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I'm bringing you 3 deeply disturbing stories from gas stations, those liminal spaces we pass through without thinking, usually late at night when we're tired and vulnerable, when the fluorescent lights create islands of brightness in an ocean of darkness. These aren't stories about simple robberies or aggressive customers. These are real experiences from real people who discovered that gas stations, especially the isolated ones on empty highways and rural roads, can become stages for encounters that defy explanation, that challenge our understanding of safety, that remind us how truly alone we can be in certain moments. Before we dive in, I want to know, have you ever stopped at a gas station late at night and felt unsafe? Have you ever had an encounter with someone at a gas station that left you genuinely frightened? Drop a comment and share your experience. Because what you're about to hear will make you think twice about pulling into that poorly lit station on a deserted road, about falling asleep in your car in an empty parking lot, about assuming that other people are there for the same innocent reasons you are. What separates a routine stop from a life-threatening situation is sometimes just chance, just timing, just the terrible luck of being in the wrong place when the wrong person arrives. Alright, let's begin. And remember, every word of these stories is true. Story 1, the blood-covered customer. I've actually got 2 connected stories that I think are worth hearing. They are both related to each other in ways I'm still trying to understand years later. My name is David. I used to work late-night shifts at a gas station convenience store out in the middle of nowhere, and I mean genuine middle of nowhere. The nearest town was maybe 15 miles in either direction, and the highway we were on didn't see much traffic after dark. This was years ago, back before every establishment had state-of-the-art security systems and cameras covering every square inch of their property. It's not like security technology didn't exist back then, it did. But for a small gas station in a low-crime rural area, it just wasn't much of a priority. Plus, the owner was incredibly cheap. He cut corners wherever possible, and security cameras were definitely one of those corners. But honestly, I didn't care much. The job was laughably easy, especially compared to other work I'd done. The most difficult part wasn't dealing with customers or cleaning or restocking, it was dealing with the owner himself. This guy legitimately had the memory of a goldfish. We'd have the same arguments multiple times a week about scheduling, about inventory procedures, about literally everything. And it was like he forgot what we'd argued about every single time, because he'd constantly repeat himself and bring up issues we'd already addressed and resolved. But whatever. The pay was decent for what I was doing, and I needed the income. Here's everything you need to know about the setup. Most nights it was just me alone in the store from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 8-hour shift, completely solo. And the place didn't see much traffic during those hours, maybe 10 or 15 customers total on a busy night, sometimes as few as 3 or 4. The building itself was typical gas station architecture from the 80s or 90s. Single story, big windows all around so you could see the pumps and parking lot from inside. 2 rows of shelves with snacks and drinks, a small coffee station that I was supposed to keep fresh but usually didn't after midnight, and a register counter with a view of the front entrance. Behind the counter was a small office area and a tiny bathroom. That was it. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Anyway, one night, I'm pretty sure it was during the week, maybe a Tuesday or Wednesday, I was doing what I always did during the slow hours, leaning against the counter with a magazine in hand, fighting against the crushing boredom that threatened to put me to sleep. It was really late. I don't remember the exact time since the store had this remarkable ability to make all the ungodly hours of the night blend into one continuous lump of fluorescent lit misery. Could have been 2 a.m., could have been 4 a.m. Time ceased to have meaning after midnight in that place. The store was dead silent except for that faint electrical buzzing noise those old fluorescent lights make. You know the sound, that constant low hum that you don't consciously notice until suddenly you do, and then you can't unhear it. My brain had gotten completely numb to that sound after months of working there. Which I guess explains why I was so startled when the front door chimed. I looked up from my magazine, some automotive thing I wasn't really reading, just staring at to keep my eyes focused on something, and there was a man walking in through the front entrance. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 3 inches or so. Black guy, appeared to be in his early to mid-30s, with an athletic build, not huge like a bodybuilder, but clearly someone who worked out regularly or had played sports. My first thought was actually ex-professional athlete, or maybe college football player. But then I looked at him a little more closely, and my brain short-circuited trying to process what I was seeing. He was covered in blood. And I don't mean a little blood. I don't mean a small cut or a nosebleed or some minor injury. I mean he was quite literally covered in blood from head to waist. Or at least, it could have been red paint, but I knew immediately it wasn't. Something about the way it was splattered, the way it had soaked into his clothing, the consistency of it. My brain registered it as blood before I consciously identified it. There was a huge splatter across his chest. His white t-shirt was basically completely red except for a few patches of original color. And there were streaks on his face and arms, like he tried to wipe it away but had only succeeded in smearing it around. It was a cartoonish amount of blood. Like something from a horror movie that's trying to be over the top. Which is exactly why my brain took so long to actually process and believe what I was seeing. It was one of those unique sights that completely paralyzes your ability to think for several moments because it doesn't fit any familiar category of lived experience. Like when you see a serious car accident up close for the first time, or witness something violent in person rather than on a screen, your brain just freezes because it has no template for processing this kind of information. But what really disturbed me, what truly made my skin crawl, were his eyes. They were just empty. Completely devoid of any emotion or awareness that I could detect. I don't know how else to describe them. It genuinely looked like he was just walking into a gas station at 2 a.m. on any other completely normal night. His expression was relaxed, almost bored. He wasn't panicked, wasn't looking around nervously, wasn't showing any signs of distress or urgency. It was like he didn't even realize or remember that he was absolutely drenched in what was very clearly blood. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming, this incredibly disturbing visual combined with this completely mundane, casual demeanor. I'm describing all this in such vivid detail because I want my reaction to make sense. I don't want to come across as some pathetic, cowardly person who overreacted to nothing. This was genuinely one of the most terrifying situations I've ever been in, and the terror came from how wrong everything about it felt. I was completely frozen behind the counter. All I could do was stare at this man as he walked casually past the front entrance toward the aisles. I couldn't help myself. Every time I managed to tear my eyes away and look down at the magazine or the register or literally anything else, my gaze immediately snapped right back to him like I was magnetically drawn to the wrongness of what I was seeing. He noticed me staring, obviously. I mean, I was quite literally gaping at him with my mouth probably hanging open like an idiot. I'm not sure what I was expecting him to do when he noticed my stare. Maybe acknowledge it, maybe explain what had happened, maybe ask for help or a phone to call 911. But I definitely was not expecting him to smile at me. Not a nervous smile. Not an embarrassed, I know I look crazy smile. Just a calm, almost friendly smile, like we were acquaintances running into each other at the grocery store. And then he said, in the most casual, conversational tone imaginable, "Don't worry about it. It's not my blood." As if that was supposed to make me feel better. As if that was a comforting piece of information that would put me at ease. It didn't. It had the exact opposite effect. My brain immediately jumped to the most logical conclusion. This guy is a murderer. He just killed someone. That's their blood all over him. And now he's in this isolated gas station with me, and I'm completely alone, and he might kill me next. Those were the only thoughts running through my head on an endless loop, and I was internally freaking out while trying desperately to keep my face neutral. But then my survival instincts kicked in, that deep, primal part of the brain that takes over in genuinely dangerous situations. I needed to act like everything was completely normal. I needed to not provoke him, not make him think I was going to be a problem, not give him any reason to see me as a threat or a witness who needed to be silenced. So I nodded at him like he'd just made a normal comment about the weather. Like he'd said pretty warm out tonight, or looks like rain tomorrow. Just a casual little nod of acknowledgement, and then I buried my head back in my magazine, pretending to be completely absorbed in an article about engine maintenance that I couldn't have read a single word of if my life depended on it. I watched him out of my peripheral vision as he walked through the aisles like nothing was wrong, like he was any other customer doing late-night shopping. He grabbed some random items. I remember a bag of chips, maybe a candy bar, possibly a drink, though I wasn't paying close attention to what exactly he was selecting. I was too focused on his movements, his body language, trying to predict what he might do next. He came up to the counter to pay, and I was actually kind of surprised by that. Genuinely shocked that he wasn't just going to steal the items and leave. I probably would have let him if he had. Would have just watched him walk out and then immediately called the police. But apparently, he was planning to pay for his snacks like a normal person, which somehow made the whole situation even more surreal. I rang him up with shaking hands, being extremely careful not to look him in the eyes, not to make direct eye contact that might be interpreted as challenging or threatening. I just focused on the register screen, on hitting the right buttons, on putting his items in a plastic bag. "That'll be $6.47, I said, my voice sounding remarkably steady despite the terror coursing through me. He pulled out a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket, his movement spreading some of the blood from his hands onto the money, and handed it to me. I took it, trying not to visibly recoil from the blood now on my fingers, and gave him his change as quickly as possible. He took the bag and the money without saying another word and walked toward the front door. The door chimed as he pushed it open. And then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness of the parking lot. Just as simply as that. Like it had all been a completely normal transaction. The second I heard a car engine start somewhere out in the parking lot, couldn't see which direction because my windows only showed part of the lot, I grabbed the phone behind the counter and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? There was a man in my store. He was covered in blood. Head to toe, just covered in it. He said it wasn't his blood. I think he might have hurt someone. Or killed someone. I don't know, but something really bad happened. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. Okay sir, slow down. Where are you located? I gave her the address of the gas station, described the man as accurately as I could, height, build, race, approximate age, what he was wearing under all that blood. I told her I didn't know what had happened, but I was absolutely positive that something serious had occurred. Nobody ends up covered in that much blood by accident. The dispatcher was asking me clarifying questions. Did he threaten me? Did he have any weapons visible? Which direction did he go when he left? What kind of vehicle was he driving? I was mid-sentence answering her question about the car when everything went completely sideways. The front door chimed again. My head snapped up toward the sound, expecting to see another customer. The last thing I wanted to deal with while on the phone with 911, but whatever. But it wasn't another customer. It was him. The blood-covered man. He was back. And he looked absolutely furious. I hung up the phone as fast as I possibly could, slamming it down onto the receiver so hard it probably cracked. But it was too late. He'd definitely seen me through the window. He knew exactly what I was doing. He must have driven out of the parking lot, then circled back around and noticed me on the phone through the large front windows. Must have put together that I was calling the police about him. He stormed up to the counter with heavy, purposeful steps, his face twisted in rage, those empty eyes now filled with fury and something that looked almost like betrayal. Did you call the cops? He demanded, his voice loud and aggressive. Did you fucking call the police on me? I denied it immediately, instinctively. No, man, I didn't call anyone. I was just... Bullshit. I saw you. I saw you on the phone looking right at me. I was talking to my friend, I swear, I wasn't. You're lying. You called the cops. He wasn't buying my denial. Not even a little bit. And I could see the situation escalating rapidly right in front of me. Things went from bad to worse in seconds. He started cursing at me, telling me to mind my own business, that I had no idea what I'd done, that I'd made a huge mistake. I put my hands up in a placating gesture, trying to look as non-threatening and apologetic as possible. Okay, look, I'm sorry, I was just. But there was nothing I could do to de-escalate the situation. Nothing I could say that would calm him down or make him leave peacefully. His voice was getting louder and louder with each passing second. Those eyes that had been empty before were now burning with rage. At first, I genuinely thought he was just going to yell at me. Curse me out, call me names, maybe threaten me, but ultimately leave. But I saw it coming a second too late to react. He jumped across the counter, and I don't mean he climbed over it carefully. I mean he launched himself across the counter in one explosive motion and tackled me to the ground before I could even think about moving or defending myself. In the span of maybe 2 seconds, he went from standing on the customer side of the counter to being on top of me on the floor, his hands wrapping around my throat. He was strangling me. Actually, genuinely trying to kill me. I'd never been in a physical altercation before that night. Never been in a real fight, never had someone attack me with genuine intent to cause serious harm. And I was absolutely certain in that moment that this man was trying to end my life. I couldn't breathe. His hands were crushing my windpipe. I could feel the blood, his or someone else's, I didn't know and didn't care, smearing all over my face and neck as we struggled. I thrashed around wildly, desperately, doing anything I could to get him off me. Kicking, scratching at his arms and face, trying to bite his hands, bucking my body to throw him off balance. I wasn't trying to win a fight. I wasn't trying to hurt him or subdue him. I was simply trying to survive the next 30 seconds. We rolled around on the floor behind the counter, knocking over displays and boxes. I could hear things clattering to the ground, could feel broken glass cutting into my back, but none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting air. My vision was starting to go dark around the edges. My lungs were screaming for oxygen. I was on the verge of passing out. In absolute desperation, I resorted to my final option. I screamed, or tried to scream with what little air I could force past his grip, "I have a gun. I have a gun under the counter and I'm not afraid to use it." A complete bluff. There was no gun. The owner had specifically told me we weren't allowed to keep firearms on the property due to liability issues. But something about the way I said it, the raw desperation in my voice, maybe, or the fact that it was at least plausible for a late-night gas station employee to be armed, must have been convincing. He stopped squeezing my throat. Stopped punching my face with his free hand. Just froze for a second, processing what I'd said. And then he scrambled off me like I'd suddenly become radioactive. He bolted for the front door without another word, moving faster than I would have thought possible. I was still on the ground when I heard his car engine roar to life and tires screech as he peeled out of the parking lot at high speed. I didn't even try to get up at first. I just laid there on the filthy floor, surrounded by blood and broken merchandise, gasping for air, my throat on fire, trying to process what had just happened. I could feel blood all over me, on my face, my neck, my clothes. A mix of someone else's blood from him and my own blood from where he'd cut my lip and the cuts on my back from the broken glass. The police showed up maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, felt like an eternity while I was lying there alone, terrified he might come back. When they walked in and saw the state I was in, covered in blood, the store trashed, clearly having been in a violent altercation, they immediately called for backup and an ambulance. 2 officers stayed with me while the others left to search the area, trying to track down the guy based on my description and the direction he'd been heading. I never heard from them again after that night. Never got a follow-up call, never heard whether they caught the guy or identified him or figured out whose blood had been all over him. There was nothing about it on the news either. No reports of murders or assaults in the area that matched the time frame, no stories about a violent criminal being apprehended. I was completely in the dark about what had actually happened that night, why that man was covered in blood, what he'd done before walking into my gas station. The experience was by far the scariest, most physically threatening thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Okay, if you thought that first story was intense, I promise you the second one is somehow even worse. More disturbing, more confusing, more unsettling in ways I still don't fully understand. A few months after that first incident, maybe 3 or 4 months, I was still working at the same gas station. Which was probably my first mistake, considering what had happened. But I needed the money, and jobs weren't exactly plentiful in that area. Plus, I'd convinced myself it was just a freak occurrence, a 1 in a million encounter that had absolutely no chance of ever happening again. I even went through a phase where I questioned whether it had really been as bad as I remembered, whether I was exaggerating the danger in my mind. Trauma does weird things to memory. But I was wrong to think it was over. Because it wasn't over. Not even close. It was another late night. Looking back now, the circumstances surrounding this night were almost identical to that first incident, which I find deeply unsettling. It was late, probably around the same time of night. I was alone in the store, dying of the same crushing boredom, leaning against the same counter reading a different magazine. The pattern was repeating itself, and I didn't even notice. This time, a different man walked into the store. The first thing I noticed, the thing that immediately caught my attention and seemed wrong, was that he was wearing a suit. And not just any suit. This thing looked expensive. Really expensive. Dark gray, perfectly tailored to his body, crisp white shirt underneath, dark tie, dress shoes polished to a mirror shine. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a boardroom or a high-end restaurant. He had no business being anywhere near a rundown gas station in the middle of nowhere past midnight dressed like that. My first thought was that he must be coming from a wedding. Or maybe some kind of corporate event that had run late. Or possibly a funeral, though the suit seemed a bit too sharp for mourning. There had to be some kind of explanation for what he was doing there, because important people, people who wear suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, don't just randomly walk into gas stations in the middle of nowhere at midnight. That just doesn't happen. And I would know, having worked there for over a year at that point. But here was this man, mid-40s maybe, average height and build, walking through my door like it was the most natural thing in the world. The guy didn't browse the aisles or even glance at the merchandise. He clearly wasn't trying to hide his intentions or pretending to be a normal customer. Instead, he walked directly up to me at the counter with purposeful, measured steps. He didn't speak. Didn't greet me or make small talk. Didn't even look at me directly. He just reached into his jacket pocket, that inside breast pocket where people keep wallets or phones, and pulled out a photograph. He placed it on the counter between us and slid it toward me with 2 fingers. I looked down at it, confused about what was happening, what this was about. And then I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a photograph of him. The blood-covered man from months earlier. The man who had attacked me behind this very counter. The photo wasn't 100% clear. It looked like it had been printed from surveillance footage or possibly a driver's license photo. Slightly grainy, slightly overexposed. But I was absolutely certain it was the same person. Same face, same build, unmistakable. I tried to mask my shock and recognition, but I'm quite sure I failed miserably. My eyes probably went wide, my face probably went pale, my breathing probably changed. I kept my gaze fixed on the photograph, but I could feel this man in the suit watching me intently, studying my reaction. He didn't say anything at first. Just let me look at the photo while he observed me, reading my body language, cataloging my responses. When I finally looked up to meet his gaze, he was staring at me with these cold, calculating eyes that I couldn't read at all. No emotion, no warmth, no hint of what he was thinking. I wasn't sure if he was expecting me to say something, so I didn't. I just stared back, waiting for him to explain why he was showing me this photograph. The silence stretched on for an uncomfortably long time. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute. Hard to say, because time dilates when you're that uncomfortable. It was painfully awkward. And then, after this really unbearably long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was surprisingly rough, gravelly and deep, like he'd been a heavy smoker for decades or had damaged his vocal cords somehow. "Have you ever seen this man before?" he asked simply, tapping the photograph with one finger. I answered immediately, without hesitation, "No. Never seen him before in my life." It felt like the right answer even though I couldn't fully explain why at the time. Some instinct was screaming at me to deny any knowledge, to distance myself from whatever this was about. My gut was telling me, deny, deny, deny. Don't get involved. Don't admit anything. The guy didn't respond to my answer. He just kept staring at me with those cold, unreadable eyes. It was really unnerving, especially given what, or rather who, he was asking me about. The silence became excruciating. With every passing second, I lost more and more confidence in the believability of my lie. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. My heart was pounding. I was terrified he could somehow tell I was lying, that he could see right through me. But I held firm. Kept my expression as neutral as possible. Didn't break eye contact or look away guiltily. I won our little implicit standoff, and the guy finally reached down and picked up the photograph, slipping it back into his jacket pocket. As soon as he turned his back to me, heading toward the door, I let out a huge sigh of relief that I'd been holding in. I thought everything was over. Thought I'd successfully navigated whatever test that had been and he was leaving. I watched him walk across the store toward the exit, every muscle in my body relaxing slightly. But right before he reached the front door, his hand was literally on the door handle, he stopped. And he turned back around to face me one more time. We made eye contact across the length of the store. And then he said, in that gravelly voice, completely calm and matter-of-fact, "I know you're lying." And then, before I could even begin to formulate a response or reaction, he pushed through the door and was gone. The chimes sounded as the door closed behind him, and I was left standing there alone, completely shocked and deeply unsettled. I was actually shaking. More than I wanted to admit to myself. Being in that store all alone suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. The isolation that had once felt peaceful now felt dangerous, vulnerable. I didn't know what to think. Couldn't figure out what the hell had just happened or what it meant. Who was that guy? How did he know about the first incident? How had he connected me to it? I started running through possibilities in my mind. Maybe he was a detective investigating what had happened that night. Maybe the blood-covered man had killed someone and they were building a case. But if he was official law enforcement, wouldn't he have identified himself? Wouldn't he have shown me a badge and asked questions properly instead of just showing me a photo and walking away? The fact that he'd been so secretive, so indirect, suggested he wasn't a cop. Which left more disturbing possibilities. Maybe he was connected to whatever the blood-covered man had been involved in. Maybe he was looking for him. Maybe he thought I knew where the guy was or had some connection to him. That thought really freaked me out, because it suggested I'd somehow gotten tangled up in something criminal, something dangerous, something way beyond my understanding. I didn't end up calling the police that time. Partly because I wasn't sure what I'd even report. A man in a suit asked me a question, and partly because I had mild PTSD from what had happened the last time I called the police from that gas station. Nothing happened for the rest of that shift or the next several shifts. Everything went back to normal, and I started to think maybe it really was nothing, maybe I was overthinking it. But then, a few weeks later, I started noticing things. The same vehicle kept appearing in different places throughout my day. A silver SUV, I think it was a Chevy Tahoe or something similar, though I'm not great with car models. At first, I'd see it parked across the street from the gas station during my occasional daytime coverage shifts. Which seemed normal enough, people park on streets all the time. But then I noticed it in the parking lot of the grocery store where I did my shopping. Same vehicle, same license plate that I'd started unconsciously memorizing. That seemed a bit stranger, a bit more coincidental. And then I saw it on my street. Parked 3 houses down from my apartment, just sitting there with nobody in it. That's when the alarm bells really started going off. I'm not a paranoid person by nature. I don't usually jump to conclusions or assume the worst. But when you see the exact same vehicle in multiple different locations over the course of 2 weeks, locations that span your work, your shopping, your home, you start to wonder. You start to connect dots that you hope aren't really connected. I had a pretty strong feeling I knew who it belonged to. It had to be that man in the suit. Had to be. I told myself that the next time I saw the car, I would call the police immediately and report it as subtly and carefully as possible. Report that I was being followed, being stalked, that I felt unsafe. The worst part about all of it was not knowing how he'd figured out where I lived. How he'd tracked me down from that single brief encounter at the gas station. I'd never given him my name. He'd never asked. I certainly hadn't told him my address or any personal information. But somehow, he'd found out. He knew where I lived and he was watching me. You have to remember, I was living alone at that time in my life. I didn't have a roommate, didn't have a girlfriend living with me, didn't have family nearby. It was just me in a small 1-bedroom apartment. I had no protection, no one to consult about this, no one to even talk to about how scared I was becoming. For some reason I still don't fully understand, I convinced myself that things would blow over if I just ignored it. That he was trying to intimidate me and would eventually give up and leave me alone. That was an incredibly stupid way to think about the situation. But I was scared and in denial and didn't want to believe I was in real danger. About 3 weeks after he'd first shown up at the gas station, 5 weeks total since I'd started noticing the SUV, I was jerked violently awake in the middle of the night by a loud, jarring sound. The unmistakable sound of glass shattering. My immediate reaction wasn't to freeze in fear or to hide. For some reason, my fight or flight response chose fight. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed, had started keeping it there after I noticed the SUV following me, and ran into my living room, adrenaline pumping, ready to defend myself. The living room was empty. No one was there. I searched my entire apartment in less than 5 minutes because the place was pretty small. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, closets. Nobody. But there was something. There, sitting in the middle of my living room floor, surrounded by broken glass from my window, was a rock. Just a plain rock, maybe the size of a baseball. Rough, gray, unremarkable. There was no note attached to it. No message spray painted on it. No explanation. But I understood what it meant anyway. It was a message. A warning. A reminder that he knew where I lived, that he could reach me anytime he wanted, that I was vulnerable. In that moment, standing in my living room at 3 a.m. surrounded by broken glass, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep working at that gas station. Couldn't keep living in that apartment. Couldn't keep pretending everything was fine and this would just go away on its own. That guy, whoever he was, whatever he wanted, was clearly involved in something serious and dangerous. He was stalking me, intimidating me, trying to send me a message about something. I didn't know what that something was, but I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted no part of it. So I caved. I gave up. I surrendered to the fear. I quit my job the very next day. Called the owner and told him I was done, effective immediately, I wouldn't be coming back. He was angry, tried to guilt me into staying, threatened to withhold my final paycheck. But I didn't care. I would have walked away from that money if necessary. I started looking for new places to live immediately. Searched for apartments in different towns, different areas, anywhere that felt far enough away. It took me a little over a month to find a place, a nondescript apartment in a small complex about 30 miles away in a completely different town. During that month, I didn't see the silver SUV a single time. Not at my current apartment, not around town, nowhere. But my mind was already made up. I wasn't staying. I moved out as quietly as possible, didn't tell anyone where I was going except the landlord and my employer at my new job. And nothing happened after that. The harassment stopped. The stalking ended. I never saw that man in the suit again, never saw that silver SUV again. I was finally at peace, or at least as close to peace as I could get given everything that had happened. I ended up moving again less than a year later, but that was unrelated, just got a better job opportunity way out of state and decided to take it and start completely fresh. That was many years ago now. I'm in my mid-40s, living in a different state, working a completely different job, living a completely different life. But I still think about both of those experiences from time to time. Even though the first encounter was objectively more life-threatening, I literally thought I was going to die on that floor. It's actually the second encounter that disturbs me more deeply. I've never been able to figure out why someone would go through all that trouble. The photograph, the stalking, the intimidation, the rock through my window. All of that effort, all of that risk, just because I called the cops on someone who was covered in blood? The only explanation I could ever come up with was that he somehow thought I had an ongoing connection to that first guy. That maybe I was sheltering him, hiding him, helping him evade capture. Maybe he thought I knew where the blood-covered man was, and he was trying to scare me into giving up that information. But that doesn't fully make sense either, because I obviously didn't have any connection to that man. He was a complete stranger who'd walked into my gas station and attacked me. It's been years and years, and I've accepted that I'll probably never figure out the truth behind any of what happened. I'll never know whose blood that was all over the first man. I'll never know what he'd done or why. I'll never know who the man in the suit was or what his connection to all of it was. Those mysteries will probably go to my grave with me unsolved. But I do know this, there are things happening in this world, criminal enterprises, violent conflicts, dangerous people pursuing dangerous agendas, that most of us never see or hear about. And sometimes, through pure bad luck and wrong timing, ordinary people like me get a brief, terrifying glimpse of that hidden world. A world where people end up covered in blood and act like it's nothing. Where mysterious men in expensive suits track you down and intimidate you. Where violence can erupt at any moment over things you don't understand. I'm just grateful I escaped that world with my life. That I was smart enough, or cowardly enough, depending on how you look at it, to run away when I had the chance. A lot of people in my situation probably would have tried to be brave, would have stood their ground, would have refused to be intimidated. Those people often don't fare very well in situations like this. Story 2, The Stowaway. This happened about 8 months ago. I work construction, and the night in question, I was heading back from a job site about 3 hours from my house. I was absolutely exhausted. The job had taken way longer than expected, would run into complications with the foundation that required extra work, and I hadn't had nearly enough caffeine in my system to handle that kind of grueling physical labor for 12 hours straight. By the time I finally packed up my tools and got back on the road, it was already past 10 p.m. Much later than I'd planned to be driving. I know a 3-hour drive doesn't sound particularly intense to most people. But when you've been doing heavy physical labor all day, lifting, carrying, digging, hammering, even the simple task of keeping your eyes open and focused on the road becomes a genuine struggle. Plus, my truck is several years old. I don't drive anything fancy with assisted driving features or lane departure warnings or any of that modern safety technology. It's just a basic work truck with manual everything. So there was no comforting sense that my vehicle would help with the drive if I started to drift off. It was entirely on me to stay alert and safe. About 4 to 5 minutes into the drive, I knew I was in trouble. I needed to stop, needed to rest, couldn't keep going. My eyelids were doing that thing where they just kind of drift downward on their own, getting heavier and heavier despite my best efforts to keep them open. I was having to physically shake my head every few minutes just to stay alert enough to drive. I've heard too many stories about people falling asleep at the wheel and drifting into oncoming traffic or off the road entirely. I wasn't going to be one of those statistics. So when I saw signs for a gas station at the next exit, I took it without hesitation. I pulled into the gas station parking lot around 11 p.m. It was one of those mid-sized chain stations, not a huge travel plaza, but bigger than a small rural station. Maybe 6 or 8 pumps, a decently sized convenience store, decent lighting. I filled up my tank even though I still had half a tank left, just to give myself something to do, some activity to wake me up a bit. Then I stepped away from the pump and lit a cigarette, leaning against my truck, letting the nicotine give me a small boost while I debated what to do next. I still had over 2 hours of driving ahead of me, and I knew with absolute certainty that there was no way I'd make it home safely in my current state. So I made the decision to take a quick nap right there in the parking lot and finish the drive afterward. It wasn't ideal, but I'd slept in my truck before. I'd worked jobs where we'd stay on site for days at a time, sleeping in vehicles or tents. This wouldn't be the first time, and it probably wouldn't be the last. I drove to the far corner of the parking lot, away from the pumps and the main entrance where light and noise might disturb me. Found a spot under a tree where it was darker and quieter. I turned my engine off completely, didn't want to waste gas idling for hours, and reclined my seat as far back as it would go. Set an alarm on my phone for 2 hours later. That should be enough rest to get me home safely. I was out almost instantly. Just completely unconscious the moment I closed my eyes. When my alarm went off, it genuinely felt like I'd blinked and time had jumped forward. That disorienting sensation of time lost that happens with deep sleep. I wasn't fully rested. 2 hours isn't nearly enough after a 12-hour workday, but I was definitely more alert than I'd been before. My eyes felt less heavy, my mind felt clearer. Good enough, I decided. I looked around the parking lot. It was completely empty now. There had been at least 2 other cars there when I'd pulled in, a sedan near the entrance and an older pickup near the air pump, but they were both gone now. Just me and the fluorescent lights and the empty pavement. Without giving it a second thought, I started my truck and pulled back onto the highway. Things were fine for maybe the first 20 minutes. The highway was almost completely empty. I maybe saw 3 other vehicles total, all going the opposite direction. I was kind of zoning out, letting my mind wander, not really thinking about anything in particular. Not falling asleep exactly, but just letting muscle memory take over. Staying in my lane, maintaining speed, operating on autopilot while my conscious mind drifted. At some point, I started noticing that my truck was making some strange sounds. It actually took my brain several minutes to process what I was hearing as abnormal. That's how zoned out I was, how much I'd faded into that highway hypnosis state. I turned down the radio. I'd been listening to some talk radio station at low volume, so I could hear things more clearly. There was this faint thumping sound coming from somewhere behind me. Not from the engine, not from the wheels. From the back of the truck. Thump, thump, thump. Irregular rhythm, not consistent with the vehicle's movement. I turned around in my seat a few times while trying to keep my eyes on the road, glancing at the back seat to see if something had fallen and was bouncing around. But there was nothing back there. Just empty seat, a couple of old fast food wrappers on the floor, my jacket wadded up in the corner. I figured it had to be something shifting around in the truck bed. One of my tools probably hadn't been properly secured and was sliding around back there with the truck's movement. Made sense. It happened sometimes, especially after long days when I was too tired to carefully organize everything. Beyond that speculation, there wasn't much I could do about it while driving. The sound wasn't urgent or alarming enough to justify pulling over. I just check it when I got home, secure whatever was loose, problem solved. I made a mental note and kept driving. But the sounds continued. And actually started to get more noticeable, more frequent. It was genuinely beginning to bother me, not because I was worried something was wrong with my truck, but because it was annoying, distracting, making it harder to zone out and just get through the remaining drive. I ended up turning the radio back up, cranking it louder than I normally would, trying to drown out the thumping sounds from the back. That helped for a few minutes. Then, at one point, I got frustrated enough that I slammed my hand against the dashboard and cursed loudly, "Would you shut the hell up already?" I wasn't yelling at anything in particular. Just venting my irritation at the noise, at the long day, at the exhaustion, at the whole situation. But strangely, that seemed to work. For maybe 10 solid minutes after my outburst, things were completely quiet. No more thumping sounds. Just the normal rumble of my truck's engine and the sound of tires on pavement. I was genuinely relieved. Not because the noise had been worrying me from a mechanical standpoint, but because it had been seriously ticking me off. The adrenaline spike from getting worked up and yelling had also woken me up considerably, which was actually a good thing. I felt more alert than I had since leaving the gas station. But that increased alertness also cleared away some of the brain fog I'd been operating under. And as my mind sharpened, I started thinking about how genuinely odd it was for noise from an inanimate object to stop so abruptly as a direct result of my shouting. I'd already mentally eliminated the possibility of a mechanical problem. My truck was old but well maintained. There was nothing loose or broken that would make intermittent thumping sounds. So the noise had to be coming from cargo in the truck bed. Tools or equipment bouncing around. But tools don't react to yelling. They don't hear you curse at them and decide to stay still. The timing was just such a weird, unsettling coincidence. I was lost in these thoughts, debating whether I should pull over and actually check the truck bed just to put my mind at ease, when suddenly, out of absolutely nowhere, I heard the most deafening crack come from directly behind me. Not behind the truck. Behind me. From inside the cab. It was not a normal sound. Not like something small falling or shifting. This was massive, violent. Like someone had thrown a sledgehammer against one of my windows. Like something large and heavy had impacted glass with tremendous force. The next 30 seconds were absolute chaos. I turned around in shock, instinct overriding my awareness that I was driving on a highway at 65 miles per hour. And what I saw almost made me lose complete control of my vehicle. There was a person in my truck bed. A full-grown man, standing up, visible through the rear window of the cab. And he was smashing that rear window with one of my tools, looked like a hammer or maybe a crowbar, hard to tell in the dark. He was attacking the glass like a wild animal trying to break into a cage. Hitting it over and over again with these violent, uncontrolled swings. The glass was holding for now, it was reinforced, not designed to shatter easily, but it was spiderwebbing with cracks, getting weaker with each impact. I could see him clearly despite the darkness. His face was twisted in rage or desperation or madness. His movements were chaotic, uncoordinated, purely violent. The way he was moving was genuinely barbaric. There's no other word for it. He wasn't trying to calmly break the glass. He was attacking it with everything he had, his whole body behind each swing. I swerved violently to the right without meaning to, my hands jerking the wheel in panic, my foot coming off the gas. The truck started fishtailing. I was losing control, spinning slightly, the back end sliding out to the left. I thought I was going to flip. Genuinely believed for a moment that my truck was going to roll, that I was about to die in a violent crash on an empty highway. But some part of my brain, the experienced driver part that had logged hundreds of thousands of miles in work trucks, managed to take over. I turned into the skid instead of fighting it. Eased off the brake instead of slamming it. Let the truck slow down naturally instead of trying to force it. I managed to wrestle the vehicle back under control, straightening out, skidding to a stop halfway between the right lane and the shoulder. For a moment I just sat there, disoriented, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. But then reality snapped back into focus. There was still a person in my truck bed. Still a maniac trying to break through the glass separating us. I ripped off my seatbelt, heard it click open, felt it slide across my chest. I don't know what came over me in that moment. I'm not typically a brave person, not confrontational by nature. I don't go looking for fights or dangerous situations. But I knew I couldn't just sit there. Couldn't just let this person attack my truck, attack me. Had to do something. I threw my door open and jumped out, the truck still in park, engine running. I ran around to the back of the truck, my work boots pounding on the pavement. As I approached the truck bed, I saw a man in a dark hoodie climbing out. He swung one leg over the side, then the other, dropping to the ground maybe 10 feet from me. He landed in a crouch, then started running immediately, not toward me, but away. Heading for the tree line off the side of the highway, into the dark woods beyond the shoulder. Without thinking, I chased after him. Actually ran after this person who'd been hiding in my truck bed, who'd been trying to smash his way into my cab. I made it maybe 20 feet before my rational brain caught up with my adrenaline-fueled instincts. What the hell was I doing? It was pitch black out here except for my truck's lights. I had no idea if this person was armed. We were completely alone on an empty stretch of highway. If I chased him into those woods, I'd be at a massive disadvantage. Couldn't see, didn't know the terrain, didn't have any weapon. He could ambush me, could attack me, could easily overpower me in the darkness. The brief surge of confidence or anger or whatever had propelled me out of my truck evaporated instantly. I was terrified again. Actually shaking as the reality of the situation hit me fully. I turned around and ran back to my truck, not looking behind me to see where he'd gone, not caring about anything except getting back to safety. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed my door shut, hit the locks. And then I drove. Just punched the gas and got the hell out of there as fast as I could. Didn't look in my mirrors to see if he was following. Didn't slow down. Just drove for several miles before my breathing started to return to normal. Eventually, when I felt like I'd put enough distance between myself and that stretch of highway, I pulled over again to inspect the damage to my truck. My hands were still shaking as I turned off the engine and got out. I walked around to the back and looked at the rear window. The glass was destroyed, not completely shattered out, but so heavily cracked and damaged that it was basically opaque. One more good hit would have taken it out entirely. I climbed up into the truck bed to see what he'd been using to break the glass. But something else caught my attention before I could even identify the tool. There was a foreign object in the truck bed that definitely wasn't mine. Something I didn't recognize at all. It took me a few seconds to process what I was looking at. It was a garbage bag. Black plastic, heavy-duty contractor style. wrapped over on itself multiple times like someone had been trying to keep it really secure, really sealed. It was small, about the size of two fists pressed together. And it looked wet, like moisture was seeping through the plastic. As I crouched down to get a better look, a smell hit me. A truly awful, stomach-turning smell that made me gag. It smelled rancid. Like rotting meat that had been left out in the sun for days. Like something organic decomposing. I absolutely did not want to touch it. Didn't want to be anywhere near it. But I also needed it out of my truck immediately. Needed to be as far away from that bag as possible. So, as carefully and quickly as I could, I reached down and grabbed it with just my fingertips, holding it away from my body. The plastic felt slippery, damp with something I didn't want to identify. I threw it as hard as I could toward the tree line, wanting it gone, wanting nothing to do with whatever was inside. Didn't even wait to see where it landed. Just immediately got back in my truck and started driving again. As I was pulling back onto the highway, I glanced down at my hands and realized with horror that they were tinted slightly red. The bag had been coated in something. Something red and viscous. Something that was now all over my fingers and palms. My stomach turned. I felt like I might actually throw up. But there was nothing I could do except keep driving. I wiped my hands on my jeans as best I could, leaving dark stains on the denim, and focused on getting home. The remaining hour and a half of the drive was pure torture. Every mile felt like 10. I kept checking my mirrors obsessively, convinced I'd see headlights behind me, convinced he'd somehow followed me. I ended up keeping the entire incident to myself for weeks. Didn't call the police, didn't tell anyone what had happened. I couldn't fully articulate why I didn't report it. Part of it was exhaustion, I just wanted to get home and sleep and forget. Part of it was a weird sense that I wouldn't be believed or taken seriously. Part of it was just shock and trauma making it hard to think clearly. It wasn't until several weeks later that I finally told some friends about the experience, and even then, I downplayed how terrified I'd been. I got a friend of mine who does auto glass repair to fix my rear window a few days after it happened. Didn't explain how it got damaged, and thankfully he didn't ask too many questions. And that was pretty much that. I tried to move on, tried to forget. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't deeply affected by what happened. That encounter fundamentally changed how I think about highway rest stops, about sleeping in my vehicle, about assuming I'm alone. Looking back now with some distance and perspective, the only explanation that makes sense is that he climbed into the bed of my truck while I was asleep at that gas station parking lot. I don't have a bed cover or tonneau cover, just an open truck bed. So anyone walking past could have easily seen it was empty and decided to hide there. He must have been lying completely flat for most of the drive, staying low enough that I wouldn't see him if I glanced in my mirrors. Which explains why I didn't notice him when I first got back on the highway. But what was he doing back there for those first 20 minutes? Just lying there waiting? Waiting for what? And what was in that bag? Whose blood was coating it? Why was he carrying something that smelled like decomposing organic matter? The possibilities that run through my mind when I think about it are all deeply disturbing. Was he trying to escape from something? Was he hiding evidence of a crime? Was he planning to attack me once I stopped somewhere more isolated? I genuinely have no idea. And honestly, I'm glad I don't know. All I know is this: I will never, ever sleep in my truck at a rest stop again. I will push through exhaustion and drive tired rather than risk something like that happening again. Because I've never been in a genuine life or death situation before that night. Never had to choose between running toward danger or running away. Never had my life actually threatened in a real, tangible way. And it was, without question, the most terrifying experience of my entire life. The fact that I escaped it unharmed was pure luck. Pure chance. A few things going differently: the glass breaking 5 minutes earlier, me not regaining control of the truck, him being armed when I chased him, and I probably wouldn't be here to tell this story. That realization haunts me more than anything else. 3 people. 3 gas stations. 3 encounters that started as routine stops and became experiences that would haunt them for years afterward. I want to thank everyone who shared their stories. Gas stations, especially the isolated ones on empty highways and rural roads, are places of vulnerability. We're tired, we're alone, we're just passing through. We never expect danger to find us there. If you found these stories compelling, please like and subscribe. And if you've had your own disturbing encounter at a gas station, something that made you realize how exposed and alone you really were, share it in the comments. These experiences need to be told and believed. Stay safe out there. When you stop at gas stations late at night, stay alert. Lock your doors. Don't fall asleep in your vehicle in empty parking lots. And remember, The people you encounter at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere aren't always there for the same innocent reasons you are. Until next time.